How are we doing, guys? I'm James from Kit Guru and we're back with another CPU cooler to have a look at. AlphaCool has kindly sent us over one of their Icebear Aurora CPU all-in-one coolers. This one is the 360, so that means it's got a 360mm radiator with triple 120mm fans, and this one is available currently from Overclockers for around about £135. If your PC case doesn't fit a 360mm radiator, AlphaCool will also do you a 240mm or a 280mm version, and there's even a 420mm version, a big triple 140mm fan version, and that's around £155. So when AlphaCool got in touch with us about this to say that they were sending it over, I was quite interested to take a look at it, because I actually used to use the original Icebear in one of my old systems. Now that had an Intel i7 6700K CPU in, which I had overclocked to about 4.7 GHz, and the Icebear did a perfect job of keeping that CPU temperature under control. So this one we're expecting similar kind of performance. Obviously our test system uses a bit more up-to-date CPU. That's got an Intel Core i9 9900K in, so that might take a little bit more cooling. But AlphaCool has updated this with a stronger pump, which is said to be about 10% more powerful, and they've also added RGB, because there was no RGB in the original. The original one just had some pretty plain looking black fans. There was no RGB in the fans, and the CPU block, it did have some lighting on. The AlphaCool logo lit up in like a blue LED lighting, and there's also a window. You can't see it on the box, but there's also a window on the pump housing, which was also illuminated with a bit of blue lighting as well. So what we'll do today is we'll take this one out of the box, have a look what's included, and then once we've got everything out on the table, we'll install it into the test system and then run through a few stress tests to see what kind of thermal performance and what kind of noise levels this produces. So as you can see, this comes in a pretty sturdy looking box. It's mostly black with a few AlphaCool logos and a bit of a description of what you're getting in the box. There's not much in the way of specifications or anything on the box, but you know, you've got some nice pictures. That's a picture of the pump housing, and then obviously a bit of a reference to RGB lighting. So yeah, let's have a look what's inside. Well, first you've got a bit of protective foam, and there's a bag with a manual inside. This looks like quite a detailed manual. I suspect there's quite a bit of installation needed with this, because it's not difficult, but it uses a bit more of a tricky installation procedure to some other CPU coolers that are available. So normally I'd probably say I don't need that installation manual, but with this one it might come in handy. So as well as the installation manual, you've got quite a big looking bag full of different fixings and screws and brackets. I'll have a look inside this bag and see what actually there is in there. So you've got a tube of thermal compound, some kind of adapter for the RGB lighting. That's a 3-pin adapter. There's a bag marked up Intel, so that's obviously Intel backplate and upper mounting brackets. There's another bag marked up AMD, and that's for the AM4 Ryzen platform. Another bag without a label, but to me that looks like it could be for TR4 Threadripper. That could be the brackets for that. And then there's an anti-static bag with some kind of RGB controller inside. As you can see there, that uses a 3-pin connection. and there's a SATA power cable connection there as well. What else have we got? There's a triple fan splitter. They're a 4-pin PWM fan splitter. And another bag with some washers and some little bolts in. And another bag with some long and some short screws. They look like they could be for the fans. So as well as that, we've got 3 of the new RGB fans. These look a lot different to the original iSpare fans. They were just the original ones were just a pretty plain and square looking fan. These have got a bit more shape to them around the edges, and obviously you've got a ring of RGB lighting around the edge. It doesn't look like the fan blades light up in RGB though. So yeah, we've got 3 of those. And then, last but not least, we've got the actual cooler. This looks, in the design it looks quite similar to the original iSpare. This uses a 360mm radiator, and these are actually Alphacool's Nexos, I think they're called, radiators, and they're an all copper core. So obviously we know that copper is an excellent conductor, so that should help with the heat transfer. A lot of your traditional all-in-one CPU coolers, they use an aluminium radiator. That's usually to keep costs down. So one thing that makes the iSpare a little different from your traditional all-in-one CPU coolers is it's actually an expandable system. So what that means is there's a quick disconnect in one of the tubes, and you can undo that, and you can add in extra parts to the system, such as a GPU cooling block. You can purchase those separately from Alphacool, and it is really simple to do. You just undo that block, connect the new hoses in line. The hoses come with the GPU block. Connect those in line, put the block onto your GPU, and away you go. You've almost got a custom loop. It's probably the next best thing to having like a full custom loop setup. So you can also see inside the CPU block, there's I think it's an acrylic window, and that kind of gives you an idea of how much fluid there is in the system. So when you add on extra pieces, there's also a fill port at the top of the CPU block. You can undo that, and you can, if you need to, you can add extra coolant in to top the levels up. So what's different about this compared to the previous versions? Well, the radiator looks pretty much the same. The tubing has been changed. On the earlier versions, this tubing actually had like a spring protection coil on it. That's to help stop it from kinking if you need to do some really tight bends with the tubing. See, this new tubing seems a bit more pliable. It looks like you can probably get a good tight bend with that without having to worry about anything kinking or reducing the flow. So as well as the new tubing, the pump housings had a bit of a redesign. The original housing just had an Alphacool logo which lit up in like a light blue colour. And then inside this window area as well, that also lit up in blue. So I'm guessing this one, it looks as though there's a bit more pattern around it, and I think that will actually light up with full addressable RGB colours. So as well as the upgraded pump, the modified housing and the different tubing, there's different fittings on here as well to the previous one. These look a little bit nicer, these. They're not as bulky as the old ones, and they're in a nice kind of matte or satin finish which matches the rest of the system. So on the bottom you've got, this is a copper thermal transfer plate. There's microchannels CNC machined into that, which helps dissipate the heat better, and it actually looks a little bit bigger, this this thermal plate compared to the previous one. So maybe that's due to the fact that this is compatible with the bigger CPUs such as the AMD Threadripper. So our test system uses an Intel Core i9-9900K CPU, and that's paired with a Gigabyte Z390 Aorus Master motherboard. Now that's the ideal board for us for testing, because inside the BIOS we can set various different profiles that has different CPU frequencies, and that gives us the option to test out and stress test the CPU with this cooler fitted and see what difference different frequencies make to the performance of the CPU cooler. So as well as the motherboard and CPU, we've got 16 gig of Patriot Viper RGB memory, and we have Windows 10, the latest version of Windows 10 installed on a Corsair LE120 SSD drive. And then the system is powered by a Seasonic Prime PX850 power supply, so that should give us all the juice we need. And then we'll see what the installation procedure consists of. I'm guessing that there's going to be a fair bit to it, looking at all these brackets and cables and stuff. So now that we've got everything laid out on the table that we think we will need for installing on an Intel platform, we've moved the camera in a little bit closer so you can get a more detailed look at how the procedure is done. So you've obviously got the option of fitting the fans on this side of the radiator in a push configuration, and that blows air through the radiator and out of the case, or through the radiator and into the case. The other option is to flip the radiator the other way round, and you can install it in a push configuration again, or you can turn the fans over and then they will pull air through the radiator and either into the case or out of the case. So for our test bench, we'll be fitting them in a push configuration fitted to this side of the radiator. So all you do is put the fans onto the radiator and take the long screws, and with this one there's obviously 12 screws to install. Just line them up with the holes, and using a Phillips screwdriver just screw them into place. Obviously make sure that your wiring's pointing the correct way that you'll need it to be pointing to manage your cables correctly. You want to obviously give yourself as much space or as much length on your cables to allow them to stretch to where they need to go. So I like to get all the fans kind of lined up with a couple of screws first, so that you know they're all in the right position, and then you can just put the rest of the screws in and then tighten them all up. So when you're tightening the screws up, you don't want to go too aggressive with the pressure. You just want to screw them down until you feel a bit of resistance on the screwdriver. If you tighten them down too much, you've got the potential of stripping the thread off the radiator or the screw, which is not ideal. It's usually only made out of quite a soft material, so it could be quite easy to strip the thread, potentially damage the radiator itself. So yeah, you just want them down so it's nice and tight and there's no movement. Obviously these fans have got kind of rubberized mounting points on them, so that cuts down on the vibration that the fans make when they're spinning. That'll obviously also cut down on the noise that they produce. These are going in pretty nice and easy. Sometimes they can be really tight with the coating that they put on these radiators. Sometimes that coating goes down into the threads where the screws goes, and it can make tightening them up a bit difficult. And they're always a Phillips head on these, So don't try and use a posi head, because that can make things a little bit more tricky. Sometimes your screwdriver will slip out, and that's the last thing you want when you're working with a radiator, because it could actually slip out and potentially go through your radiator and damage it. So just tighten the last screw up. So yeah, that's that bit done. They're all nice and tightly secured down to the radiator. We'll leave the wiring for now. That's one of the last jobs that we'll do. So now we'll move on and see how we prepare the other side of the all-in-one cooler, the pump housing. So for Intel, you need to select these brackets. There's two brackets that make up the mounting system, and what they do is they slide into this notch or this groove around the edge of the CPU block, and then once you've slid them in together, they'll lock into place, and that's enough to hold it in position. Once they're in, it's not going anywhere. So you need to really have a look on your CPU and see which way round you want this to be facing, because it can obviously go either way around. We want it to be facing kind of like that, so I'm guessing our brackets will need to go in on this side, and this slide in really easily. That one on that side, and then this one slides in on the other side. It just clips into place just like that. So the next part of getting the CPU block ready for installation means taking these long screws with a Phillips head on the top. There's also got a bit of a grippy surface on there, so they're probably designed so that you can tighten up so much with your fingers. So what you need to do is take the long screws that came in the Intel pack, take one of the springs, slide that over the screw, and then take one of the small washers, put that in place next, and then hold that through one of the holes on the bracket, and take the little, I think they're an 8mm nut, and then just tighten that down onto the screw. You want to make sure that you get these nice and tightly held in position, because one thing that I did find with the old Icebear was that over a few years those nuts could work their way loose. So it's probably, you can probably get them tight enough just doing it by hand, but if you struggle with that, you could always hold on to the nut with a pair of pliers or something like that, just to give it an extra nip up. There's actually two different screw types as well. There's one type with a coarse thread and then a fine thread right at the end, and the other type has just got the same thread all the way down. I've just checked, and for our Z390 installation we need the ones with the two different thread types. So we do the same again. Take a screw and a spring and a washer, move on to the next mounting hole, tighten that one in place so it's nice and secure like that, and then you repeat that for the other two mounting holes. Same again, spring onto the screw, a washer through the mounting hole, and then put your nut in place. So that's that. Now you've got the CPU block all ready to be mounted to the Intel motherboard platform. And what we'll do now is we'll actually prepare the motherboard side of things. So we'll move this out of the way for a minute. Bring our test system into view. So to install the CPU block to the motherboard, AlphaCool has provided an Intel specific backplate. So this has got a couple of self-adhesive strips on it. If you just peel the backing off, that'll allow it to hold on to the underside of the motherboard and probably make the installation a little bit more easy for you. So you can see there's two little notches cut out of the bracket, and on the back of the motherboard there's a couple of screws, and those notches go where the two screws are. So these mounting threads, these actually slide in some elongated holes that are cut out of the bracket, and that's so that you can adjust this to fit different kinds of Intel platforms. For our Z390 motherboard, I think we need these all the way in, but we'll find out when we try and put it in place. So we've actually removed the self-adhesive strip backing, so hopefully this will hold in place while we try and put it on the back of the motherboard. So to do that, just kind of slip it underneath the motherboard and then try and line up your mounting threads with the holes in the motherboard, and then just kind of press it in place, not too hard, until it's stuck in position, which you can see we've managed to do. So now that we've got the fans installed on the radiator, we've got the Intel backplate attached to the motherboard and the CPU block mounting brackets and fixings attached to the CPU block. The next step is probably the most difficult part, but you just need to take your time and take a bit of care to make sure you get it right. So because the mounting solution that AlphaCool has applied on this cooler allows the screws and the fixings to slide up and down in the bracket, it's best to try and temporarily get the position correct before applying your thermal compound and doing this for real. So we just lower the CPU block down into position and just have a look to see if the screws line up with the holes on the backplate. Looking at ours, they are pretty good as they are, but just to get them 100% perfect, you just have to slide the screws so that they're in place. And it's best to do this before you install the thermal compound, because if you do it with the thermal compound in place, you might end up in a bit of a mess. Just take some thermal compound and apply that whichever way you prefer. I'm going to use the pea-sized blob method and make sure I get plenty on. You can obviously put too little thermal compound, so it's better to make sure you've got enough so that it spreads nice and evenly once you put the CPU block in place. So now the thermal compound's in on the CPU, we just need to go back and lower the CPU block down in line with the fixing holes and just tighten the screws down a little bit at a time. And you're better off working from corner to corner, because that kind of spreads the pressure over the CPU more evenly. It'll give us a nice even spread of the thermal compound. So just keep working these from corner to corner, a little bit at a time. And then you can always use your Phillips screwdriver just to get them fully tightened up. And you'll know when they are fully tightened because the fine thread at the bottom of the screw will actually bottom out onto the mounting holes. So once it's tight, you don't want to be going too far so that you could potentially break the screws or strip the thread on the mounting bracket. So just keep working them down a bit at a time until you feel them stop, like that. Just the final few turns, and that's it. So you'll see now that's nice and solid in position. And now we just move on to connecting all the cables up. So now that we've got all the hardware components installed into the system, the next part of the installation is to install the cables for the fans and the pump and for the RGB lighting. So the first step, take the 3-way fan splitter that is provided in the kit. You need to connect each 4-pin fan cable to the splitter. Just like that. And now you need to locate your CPU fan header on your motherboard, which in our case is this grey one here. And then just connect the other end of the splitter up to that. And then we'll just pull the cables through to make them look a bit neater and not get in the way of any of the fans. So that's that part done. Next you need to connect the power cable for the fan. This is a 3-pin fan header, but it will obviously still fit into a 4-pin header on the motherboard. So on our Gigabyte Z390 Aorus Master, there is an optional CPU fan header next to the CPU fan header. So we'll just connect this up to that, and that'll power our pump. So to connect the RGB lighting, you've actually got two options. You can either, if your motherboard supports it, you can connect to a 3-pin RGB header on the motherboard, or AlphaCool has supplied a simple looking RGB fan controller what takes external power from a SATA power cable. So since our motherboard uses a 3-pin RGB header, we'll show you how that's connected up first. It's pretty simple. You just need to connect the 3 fans together. They have like a built-in extension lead on each cable, on each RGB cable. So we just connect those to each other. Like that. And we can connect that to the pump as well. So they're all connected in line now. And then you take the included RGB extension cable and you find the final male connection from the fans, connect that to the RGB extension, and then if you have a look on our motherboard, we've got 2 RGB headers here, a 4-pin and a 3-pin. This uses a 3-pin version, so we'll just connect up to that. And that's it. That's how you get the RGB on the AlphaCool IceBear to be synchronized with your motherboard RGB lighting. So the alternative way to connect the RGB lighting is to use the included AlphaCool RGB controller. So instead of connecting the RGB extension cable to the motherboard, you simply connect it to the 3-pin header on the AlphaCool RGB controller that's provided, which is pretty simple. And then all you need to do is connect the other end to a spare SATA power cable coming from your power supply. just like that. Then obviously on this controller, and on the controller there is different modes and different lighting colours, and then you can also connect the you can also control the speed that the lighting effects run at. So it's up to you really. You can if you have a RGB motherboard, you can simply connect it up to your motherboard, synchronize it with the RGB on the motherboard, or if you don't have an RGB motherboard, Alpha Cooler has provided you quite a simple, easy to use controller, so you could still take benefit from all the RGB effects and colours and patterns and everything. So that's the installation completed now. Next thing we'll do is we'll move on to test the thermal performance and noise levels. We'll get this hooked up to a monitor and keyboard and mouse and everything, and we'll talk you through how we run the performance tests and show you what kind of results we get with this Alpha Cooler Ice Bear. Right, we've got the system all booted up and running now. Everything seems to be working as it should. And before we go over the thermal performance testing, we'll have a quick look at the RGB lighting. So when you first turn the system on, you notice straight away how nice and bright and vivid the RGB lighting is in the fans on the Ice Bear Aurora. Probably some of the best looking RGB lighting we've seen. It's right up there with some of the top Corsair and Thermaltake stuff. So yeah, Alpha Cooler's done a really good job with that. We really quite like that. The RGB lighting on the pump housing or the CPU block, it's a little bit more subtle, but it still seems to fit in nicely with the motherboard RGB lighting, and it synchronizes perfectly well, so we've no real complaints with that either. So the way we've got the RGB lighting set up at the moment is connected directly to the motherboard header. So we can go into the RGB Fusion software and we can synchronize the lighting on the all-in-one cooler with the motherboard, various bits on the motherboard that light up, and with the Patriot Viper RGB memory. So using the RGB Fusion software, we can scroll through various different colours. There's a bunch of preset colours there which you can choose from, as well as a kind of like scroll wheel kind of thing where you can virtually choose any colour you can think of. As well as that, there's some preset patterns and effects. You can skip through them, you can choose a different effect or a different pattern if that's what you prefer. Or on the other hand, we can disconnect it from the motherboard and connect up to the included Alpha Cooler RGB controller, and then we can press the mode button on the controller, and that allows you to skip through various different patterns. You can also use the speed button on the controller, and that adjusts the speeds that the patterns or effects run at. And there's also at the bottom of the controller there is a button that's labelled light, and that obviously changes the colour of the lights. So if you prefer to use a static colour, again you just skip through with the mode button, and then you can set the Ice Bear with a static colour of your choice to match in with your system. And again you can skip through the different colours using the light button. So to test the thermal performance of CPU coolers, we have 3 profiles loaded into the Gigabyte motherboard BIOS with 3 different CPU frequencies and voltages. We then use AIDA64 and we run a series of stress tests on the CPU. So we put the CPU under 100% load and we measure the average temperatures during the test, and then we deduct the ambient temperature in the room from the CPU temperatures to get a delta. That way we can ensure that any changes in the room temperature doesn't affect the results that we end up with. As well as testing under load, we also run a test while the CPU is idle in Windows to get the idle temperatures. For more information on how we test CPU coolers, head over to the KitGuru website where there's a full written review and you can check out more information there. So we've completed all our thermal performance tests now on the AlphaCool Ice Bear Aurora, and we've got the results compiled into our chart. With the Core i9-9900K set at 3.6 GHz, the AlphaCool Ice Bear Aurora 360 recorded 32.2 degrees under load. So that puts it about in the middle of the charts, and it's in line with similar size all-in-one coolers that we've tested over the past 12 months. When we set the CPU frequency at 4.7 GHz, the AlphaCool Ice Bear Aurora recorded 50.5 degrees. Again, this is around about the middle of our charts and within 1 or 2 degrees of similar all-in-one coolers. And finally, with the CPU frequency at 4.9 GHz, the AlphaCool Ice Bear recorded 63.1 degrees, which again is very similar to other all-in-one CPU coolers, and it's around about the middle of the chart. So yeah, overall, thermal performance is adequate. So as well as testing the thermal performance of CPU coolers, we also take a look at the noise levels they produce with the fans running at 100% RPM. And what we notice with the AlphaCool Ice Bear Aurora is that it's considerably quieter than other all-in-one CPU coolers that actually outperform it in terms of thermal performance. So at 46.1 decibels, you're less likely to be annoyed by the noise of the fans when they're running at full speed. So what that means is that AlphaCool have gone for more of a balance between noise and thermal performance rather than just going for raw thermal performance with the AlphaCool Ice Bear Aurora. So what do we think about the AlphaCool Ice Bear Aurora 360 in terms of a complete package? While it's not the best we've ever tested when it comes to thermal performance, it does offer a good balance between thermal performance and noise levels. Even on our Intel Core i9-9900K, which is quite a powerful CPU that runs really warm, especially at 4.9 GHz, it does do an adequate or a more than adequate job of keeping it cool. During our testing, we didn't see any signs of core slowdown that was due to any thermal throttling, which is good. We have seen that in the past with other CPU coolers we've tested. We also think that the way that AlphaCool has implemented the RGB lighting, especially in the fans, is very good. Like I said earlier, it's probably one of the better ones that I've seen before. The Ice Bear Aurora offers extra features that you don't usually get with other traditional all-in-one CPU coolers. You can obviously expand the system, so you can add in a GPU block that you can purchase separately from AlphaCool, so you can keep the GPU temperatures under control better with a liquid cooling system. And there's also the fact that if for any reason the coolant levels dropped below a safe level, you've got the option to top up the coolant with the fill port on top of the CPU block. Another thing that's worth mentioning as well about this kind of system is it uses all standard fittings. These are just standard 1/4 inch fittings, what you find on all kinds of custom loop cooling. And if you did decide that you want to switch to a custom loop in the future, you could take the radiator from the Ice Bear Aurora and the fittings and even the tubing if you wanted to, and use that in your custom loop. So that's kind of another bonus that you get with this, what you wouldn't get with a traditional all-in-one CPU cooler. So overall, we think that for the £135 that this costs at the moment, it represents good value. Obviously, because of the extra features that you get in with this compared to other all-in-ones, and it's quite a good looking system. There's no reason why this wouldn't fit in perfectly with any kind of PC build, whether that's a gaming system, workstation system. We also have a full written review of this all-in-one CPU cooler over on the KitGuru website, so head over there and check that out. And we have a Facebook page where you can discuss what you think about this CPU cooler. I've been James from KitGuru, and thanks for watching.